What if I told you that in the impenetrable jungles of El Salvador, during the bloodiest years of the Civil War, a soldier encountered something that challenges our entire understanding of reality? What would you do if you knew there were military accounts that were deliberately buried? Stories that could rewrite everything we know about our own origins. Have you ever wondered why certain military experiences never make the news? Why some veterans carry secrets that haunt them decades after? Leaving the battlefield? Why do ancient scriptures speak of giants who walked among us? And why are these narratives systematically dismissed as mythology? This isn't just another war story. It's the testimony of a man who saw something that shouldn't exist, something so extraordinary and disturbing that it forever changed his perception of what truly inhabits our world. In 1979, as El Salvador descended into the chaos of a devastating civil war, a Salvadoran soldier experienced an encounter that would haunt him for the rest of his life. An encounter with beings who, according to ancient scriptures and lost legends, walked among us long before recorded history began. What this soldier saw in those dark jungles of El Salvador may be the most compelling proof that we are not alone on this planet, and perhaps never have been. Decades have passed, but the memory remains crystal clear in the mind of the veteran who shared this extraordinary account. His words, laden with a weight that transcends time, reveal an experience that challenged not only his understanding of reality, but his very sanity. "I was on duty in the mountains north of the capital," he reported, his voice still carrying traces of the trauma he'd experienced. "It was a routine reconnaissance patrol, or at least it should have been. The Salvadoran Civil War had just begun in 1979, but it already showed unmistakable signs of the brutality that would mark the next 12 years of internal conflict. The mountainous jungles of the Chalatenango region represented contested territory, where guerrillas and government forces engaged in a deadly dance between ancient trees and steep ravines that cut through the landscape like open wounds in the earth. The veteran, then 28 years old and with 7 years of military service, commanded one of the units specializing in territorial reconnaissance in the most remote and dangerous areas of the country. His experience in night operations and knowledge of the mountainous terrain made him a key player in infiltration and observation missions. On that particular August morning, the air was heavy and dense, laden with the humidity characteristic of the rainy season that transformed tropical forests into veritable natural greenhouses. The cecropier and avocado trees formed a nearly impenetrable canopy, filtering the meager light of the crescent moon into ghostly fragments that danced across the forest floor like spectral shadows. The sounds of the jungle's nocturnal life created a complex natural symphony: crickets, frogs, the occasional cry of a quetzal, the rustling of leaves stirred by warm breezes, an organic cacophony that had the power both to mask enemy approaches and to warn of unwanted presences through its sudden interruptions. It was as if the forest itself had held its breath, the soldier recalled, with an imperceptible tremor still in his voice even after so many years. Suddenly, all sounds stopped simultaneously. Not a cricket, not a frog, not even the wind in the leaves. Just a total, oppressive silence that seemed to press against our eardrums. The veteran was positioned with his small reconnaissance unit on a natural rock formation, a strategic elevation located approximately 15 meters above what appeared to be an ancient indigenous trail, possibly used for centuries by the region's native peoples to cross the mountains. He personally occupied the highest observation point in the position, which offered a partial but strategic view of the valley below through the intertwined branches of the dense vegetation. His military experience had taught him to value high vantage points, especially in mountainous terrain where the topography could easily conceal enemy movements. It was precisely at this moment of concentrated vigilance that he felt the first anomalous vibration pass through the rocky ground. Initially, I thought it might be a distant military vehicle navigating some unfamiliar road, or perhaps a small earthquake, he explained methodically. El Salvador is located on the Pacific Ring of Fire, and small earthquakes are not uncommon in the region. But this particular vibration was completely unlike anything I had ever experienced. The vibration exhibited rhythmic and constant characteristics that clearly differentiated it from natural geological phenomena. It was a regular pulsation that seemed to emanate from a specific source and move across the terrain in a directed manner. I felt the ground shake beneath my feet in a way I couldn't explain, he recalled with surgical precision, his distant eyes reliving those initial moments of confusion and growing apprehension. It wasn't like an earthquake, which usually has irregular, unpredictable waves. It was like when a heavy military vehicle passes on a nearby road, creating regular rhythmic vibrations. Only we were in the middle of absolute nowhere, with no known road for miles in any direction. The vibrations gradually intensified, following a pattern that suggested approaching movement. Each individual impact seemed to echo through the geological structure of the rocky ground, traveling up the soldier's legs and lodging deep in his stomach like a physical omen of something unnameable slowly approaching. His extensive military experience told him unequivocally that something was deeply wrong with the situation, but absolutely nothing in his formal training or field experience had adequately prepared him for what he was about to witness in those remote mountains of El Salvador. How can an experienced soldier, trained to identify and neutralize conventional threats, mentally process signals that completely defy his understanding of known reality? What happened in the next few minutes would defy any attempt at rational explanation or framing within the known parameters of conventional military experience. Through the dense green curtain of tropical vegetation, at an estimated distance of approximately 100 meters, the veteran glimpsed a silhouette that literally made his blood run cold. The figure was undeniably humanoid in its basic structure, but it displayed proportions that completely transcended any known parameters of normal human anatomy. It was like looking at something straight out of the pages of the old Jack and the Beanstalk stories. He would later describe, searching for familiar references to describe the indescribable. But there was absolutely nothing magical or enchanting about it. It was something primal, powerful, and undeniably real. Every fiber of my military-trained being told me it shouldn't exist, but my eyes were seeing exactly the opposite. The creature's height was extremely difficult to determine with absolute precision, due to the dense vegetation partially obstructing his line of sight, but the soldier conservatively estimated it to be between 4 and 5 meters tall. Even with this cautious estimate, the sheer magnitude of the figure was simply overwhelming when compared to any normal human reference point. Even more impressive was the surprising fluidity of its movements for something of such extraordinary magnitude. There was none of the natural clumsiness or lack of coordination one would logically expect from a creature of such gigantic proportions moving across uneven, densely vegetated terrain. Every single step seemed calculated and purposeful, he recalled, his distant eyes reliving those terrifying moments with photographic clarity. It was as if the creature knew every inch of the terrain it walked perfectly and intimately. As if this particular forest had been its established territory for far longer than any known human presence in the region. The entity moved with a deliberate cadence that suggested not only familiarity with its surroundings, but also a kind of ancient and established territorial ownership. There was no haste in its movements, nor any indication of caution or concern for potential observers or threats. For the endless, tense minutes that followed that first shocking vision, the soldier remained in absolute silence, peering through the tropical vegetation at a figure that fundamentally challenged everything he thought he knew about the nature of physical reality. It wasn't just the creature's monumental size that terrified him deeply. It was the primal and completely inexplicable sensation of being in the presence of something truly ancient, something that shouldn't exist in the context of the known modern world, but was there, indisputably real, walking through that forest as if it were the rightful owner of that territory. What followed that first vision was an experience the veteran would describe as the purest fear I've ever felt in my life. It wasn't the familiar kind of fear that accompanies conventional military combat, the controlled adrenaline rush that sharpens the senses and quickens reflexes. It was something fundamentally different, deeper, and more primal. It wasn't like the fear of dying in combat, the soldier confessed, his voice instinctively lowering to a whisper even decades later. It was something that came from a much older place inside me. It was like every cell in my body was screaming at me to run away immediately. But at the same time, I was completely paralyzed, unable to even blink. For exactly 23 minutes, he had been checking his military watch compulsively throughout the episode. He remained in his elevated position, watching through the tropical vegetation, a creature that walked with the supreme indifference of one fully aware of its absolute territorial dominance. The entity showed no apparent hurry or concern. It didn't look around for possible observers or threats. It didn't alter its walking pace or show any signs of caution. It was simply an ancient being following its natural, established path through a domain that had apparently belonged to it for time immemorial. It was like observing the true owner of those mountains, the veteran reflected. We were the intruders there. We were the uninvited visitors in his ancestral territory. During these endless minutes of forced observation, a series of contradictory thoughts ran through the soldier's mind. His natural military curiosity compelled him to observe and catalog every detail of the creature for later reporting. His combat experience told him to assess the threat level and develop neutralization strategies. But his primal survival instinct screamed only one word: flee. How can the human mind process something that completely defies its established categories of understanding? How does a soldier trained to face tangible threats react when confronted with something that transcends their known reality? My comrades saw it too, the veteran recounts with absolute conviction. We were all in a state of collective shock. It was as if 5 seasoned men, trained to face any known human threat, had simultaneously been transformed into stone statues in the face of something that completely transcended our military comprehension. The silence that fell among the unit members during those critical minutes wasn't just tactical, it was existential. Each man was individually processing an experience that challenged not only their understanding of physical reality, but their very identity as rational, competent soldiers. It was during this period of tense, silent observation that some of his companions began to whisper among themselves about the possibility of killing the creature. The suggestion, perhaps born of desperation to regain some control over a situation completely outside their experience, was simultaneously absurd and suicidal. 2 soldiers suggested trying to kill it to get rich, the veteran recalled, shaking his head with an expression that mixed disbelief and retrospective regret. They talked about how much money we could make, about how scientists would pay fortunes to study such a creature. The sergeant in charge told them to keep quiet. We all thought they were idiots for suggesting it. The unit leader's instinctive reaction revealed a deep intuitive understanding. Any being capable of inspiring that particular level of primal terror in seasoned soldiers was not something to be met with conventional weaponry, no matter how many rifles or explosives were at hand. Moreover, there was something about the creature's very presence, an intangible yet undeniable aura of ancient, inviolable power that suggested that attacking it would be not only militarily futile, but profoundly dangerous on levels that transcended conventional tactical understanding. The creature continued its progress through the forest with a methodicality that bordered on ritual. Each step seemed part of a journey established eons ago, following invisible routes yet deeply ingrained in the very fabric of the mountainous landscape. The veteran watched, fascinated despite his terror, as the entity navigated through the dense vegetation without seemingly disturbing the natural structure of the environment. Branches didn't break under its monumental weight. The undergrowth wasn't trampled or destroyed. It was as if the forest itself naturally accommodated its passage, recognizing its ancestral territorial legitimacy. It was like watching a very ancient dance between the creature and the forest, the soldier would later describe. There was no destruction or violence in their movements, as if they had been part of the same system for thousands of years. This particular observation would remain etched in the veteran's memory as one of the most disturbing of the entire experience. The idea that this creature was not a visitor or intruder in those mountains, but rather a resident long established in memory, raised questions about the true history of that region that challenged everything he believed he knew about El Salvador and its geography. How many other similar beings might inhabit the most remote and unexplored regions of the Central American mountains? How long had these creatures secretly coexisted with local human populations? And even more disturbing, why had this knowledge never reached official military or scientific circles? The creature eventually disappeared completely into the impenetrable density of tropical vegetation, leaving only the ghostly echo of its footprints vibrating through the rocky ground. But its physical absence did not bring immediate relief to the soldier and his unit. We stayed in our positions for over an hour after it disappeared, the veteran recounted. No one wanted to be the first to move. There was a collective fear that there might be other similar creatures in the area, or that this particular one might return. The silence that followed the entity's disappearance was qualitatively different from the oppressive silence that had preceded its appearance. It was a silence charged with mental processing, of men desperately trying to fit an impossible experience within their limited cognitive frameworks. When they finally moved, it was with a caution that went far beyond standard military protocol. Every shadow among the trees was potentially another giant creature. Every natural sound in the forest was interpreted as the possible approach of something unnameable. We returned to base as quickly and quietly as possible, he reported with military precision. No one spoke a single word the entire way back. It was as if we were processing something our collective mind refused to accept as real, but which we knew had happened. The return journey, which would normally take approximately 2 hours through the mountainous terrain, was completed in record time. But it wasn't efficient military haste. It was primitive flight from something that had fundamentally challenged their understanding of reality. When the unit finally arrived at the military base and had the opportunity to report what had happened to their superiors, the reaction was not only predictable, but devastatingly demotivating. Nobody believed us, the soldier said with a bitterness that remained palpable decades later. Absolutely nobody. We were treated as if we had suffered some kind of mass hallucination or combat stress. Senior officers, focused on the immediate tactical realities of the unfolding civil war, had neither the time nor the patience for reports that challenged established categories of known threats. Guerrillas, smugglers, arms dealers, these were tangible threats that required specific military responses. Giant humanoid creatures simply didn't fit into any existing security protocols. The pilots were particularly skeptical and completely dismissive of our story, the veteran recalled with still visible frustration. They argued that they fly over that jungle all the time and would certainly have seen it if there really was a creature as big as the trees, as we claimed. This reaction by the pilots was logically understandable from a conventional military perspective. Aerial reconnaissance was a crucial tool for identifying ground threats, and the idea that something of such significant magnitude could exist undetected by regular air patrols seemed statistically improbable. But the soldier maintained his version of events with a consistency that transcended decades. I have repeatedly emphasized that I did not have a completely clear and unobstructed view, he explained patiently. There were trees partially blocking my line of sight. I cannot state with absolute certainty every anatomical detail of the creature. Despite widespread institutional skepticism, the veteran never wavered in his conviction about the fundamental reality of what he had witnessed in those remote mountains of El Salvador. All I know for certain is that the ground was shaking in a very specific way, as if some truly large, lumbering creature were walking toward us. He reiterated with scientific precision. I saw what looked unmistakably like a giant human being walking in the distance through the vegetation. I instinctively hid and only came out of my defensive position after the creature had completely disappeared from the area. When questioned about the possibility of physical discovery bones, footprints, tangible evidence, especially considering that El Salvador is a geographically small country with relatively extensive territorial exploration, the soldier responded with characteristic honesty. I know nothing about physical evidence or subsequent discoveries, he admitted frankly. I only know exactly what I saw on that particular day. And what I saw was real, regardless of who believes it or not. This persistence wasn't dogmatic or defensive. It was the calm consistency of someone who had witnessed something extraordinary and felt no need to convince skeptics or adapt his narrative to make it more palatable to reluctant audiences. Decades after the event, the veteran continued to process the broader implications of his experience. If creatures of such magnitude truly inhabit the remote regions of El Salvador, and potentially other mountainous areas of Central America, what other assumptions about our understanding of regional biodiversity would need to be revised? Sometimes I wonder how many other things there are in those mountains that have simply never been officially documented. He mused. How many other similar experiences have been reported and then buried because they didn't fit into acceptable official categories? The Salvadoran Civil War, which devastated the country between 1979 and 1992, resulted in more than 75,000 deaths and displaced hundreds of thousands of people. During these years of intense conflict, vast rural and mountainous areas remained essentially inaccessible to scientific exploration or systematic documentation. Is it possible that extraordinary creatures have inhabited these regions for centuries, secretly coexisting with local human populations who may have developed cultural traditions to avoid or respect these ancient beings? Could the region's indigenous legends, often dismissed as folklore by outside observers, contain kernels of historical truth about real encounters with beings that transcend our conventional zoological understanding? For the veteran who experienced this extraordinary encounter, the experience remained an existential watershed that separated his life into before and after that moment in the Salvadoran mountains. It completely changed my perspective on what's possible in this world, he confessed. Not just about creatures or biodiversity, but about the limits of our collective understanding as a human species. The experience also left lingering questions about the nature of reality, evidence, and institutional credibility. As a society, how prepared are we to process information that fundamentally challenges our established categories of knowledge? How many other extraordinary accounts are routinely dismissed not because they lack factual merit, but because they simply do not fit into explanatory frameworks accepted by the dominant culture? And perhaps most importantly, what responsibility do we have as a society to seriously investigate claims that, while extraordinary, are presented by credible witnesses with consistent and detailed stories? The case of the Salvadoran soldier remains a disturbing reminder that our understanding of the natural world may be significantly more limited than we often assume, and that the truth is stranger than any science fiction film we can imagine. The Salvadoran veteran's account confronts us with fundamental questions that echo through millennia of human tradition. What exactly were these giant creatures that roamed the jungles of El Salvador? To understand the possibilities, we must delve into the ancient narratives that permeate diverse cultures around the world. The Anunnaki, as described in Sumerian cuneiform texts dating back more than 4,000 years, were beings of colossal stature who supposedly descended from the heavens to inhabit Earth. These ancient scriptures describe them as entities of gigantic proportions who possessed advanced knowledge and exerted direct influence on the development of human civilization. Are the giants of El Salvador direct descendants or remnants of this ancient lineage? On the other hand, the Nephilim mentioned in both the Book of Genesis and the Book of Enoch represent an even more disturbing category of giant beings. Described as the giants who were on the earth in those days, these beings were the product of the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. Their monumental stature and hybrid nature made them simultaneously fascinating and terrifying to the human populations of the time. Both of these ancient traditions converge on crucial points that echo the Salvadoran soldier's account: beings of impossible stature, deliberate and majestic movement, and a presence that inspired primordial terror in human observers. The sense of being before something ancient and owner of the territory resonates deeply with historical descriptions of these primordial beings. But what if we consider a third possibility? What if these creatures represent a completely unknown lineage of hominids that managed to survive in remote regions, developing alongside conventional human evolution? This theory would explain both their humanoid nature and their ability to remain hidden from modern scientific investigation. The choice of El Salvador as the setting for this extraordinary encounter is no coincidence. This small Central American country, with its 21,041 square kilometers, boasts unique topographical features that make it an ideal refuge for creatures that prefer to remain hidden from modern civilization. The Chalatenango Mountains, where the sighting occurred, are part of the central mountain range that runs through El Salvador from northwest to southeast. This mountain range creates a complex series of deep valleys, natural caves, and virtually impenetrable forests that have remained largely unexplored even in modern times. During the Salvadoran Civil War, 1979 to 1992, vast rural areas became zones of active conflict, effectively isolating entire regions from government control or scientific exploration. These involuntary free zones created natural sanctuaries where wildlife and potentially other life forms could exist without significant human interference. Furthermore, El Salvador is located at the convergence of three tectonic plates: the North American Plate, the Caribbean Plate, and the Cocos Plate. This intense geological activity has created a complex underground network of caves, tunnels, and rock formations that could serve as ideal habitats for creatures that prefer to avoid contact with humans. Local indigenous tradition also offers intriguing clues. The Pipil and Lenca peoples, the region's original inhabitants, maintained oral legends about gigantic mountain men who inhabited the highest, most inaccessible regions of the mountain ranges. These narratives, often dismissed as folklore by European colonizers, may represent cultural memories of actual encounters with these ancient creatures. The Salvadoran soldier's reaction of absolute skepticism reflects a global pattern of systematic denial when it comes to reports of giant beings. This lack of credibility is no accident. It is the result of a complex confluence of scientific, cultural, and institutional factors that work to marginalize any evidence that challenges established paradigms. From an academic scientific perspective, reports of gigantic humanoid creatures face the fundamental problem of a lack of cataloged physical evidence. Modern paleontology has established specific evolutionary timelines for hominid development, and the existence of a parallel giant lineage does not easily fit into accepted models of human evolution. Institutionally, military organizations have strict protocols for classifying threats and field reporting. Sightings that don't fit into recognized categories of wildlife or hostile activity are often reclassified as unconfirmed or archived indefinitely. Admitting the existence of unknown creatures would imply fundamental revisions to security, protocols, and territorial strategies. Mainstream media faces commercial and editorial pressures to maintain journalistic credibility. Extraordinary stories, even when sourced from reputable sources, are often relegated to entertainment or fun facts sections to avoid questions about journalistic accuracy. Culturally, our modern society has developed a psychological resistance to narratives that challenge our sense of control and understanding of the natural world. The idea that powerful and intelligent creatures could exist outside our scientific knowledge is deeply disturbing to worldviews based on human technological and intellectual supremacy. When major media outlets and news outlets cover stories about giant beings, the treatment follows predictable patterns that effectively neutralize any serious impact of the narratives. Mainstream television channels often frame these reports as unsolved mysteries or paranormal phenomena programs, automatically categorizing them as speculative entertainment rather than legitimate journalistic investigation. This approach allows them to present the content without endorsing its veracity, maintaining a safe editorial distance. Established newspapers and magazines rarely devote significant investigative resources to verifying or further investigating these reports. When they are mentioned, they are often dismissed as regional curiosities or are quickly discredited through citations from scientific authorities who debunk the claims without independent investigation. Digital platforms and social media have created an environment where extraordinary accounts are mixed with clearly fictional content, conspiracy theories, and deliberate misinformation. This information saturation makes it extremely difficult for audiences to distinguish between genuine accounts and fabrications, effectively diminishing the credibility of all extraordinary testimonies. The result is a vicious cycle. Credible witnesses hesitate to share experiences for fear of ridicule, while the absence of official accounts is used to justify continued institutional skepticism. Imagine for a moment that the Salvadoran soldier's account is completely factual. Imagine that giant humanoid creatures actually inhabit the remote regions of our planet, secretly coexisting with humanity for millennia. What would be the fundamental implications for our society and the pillars that support our understanding of civilization? Religiously, confirmation of the existence of ancient giant beings would validate specific aspects of multiple spiritual traditions that have largely been relegated to the status of mythology. Biblical texts, Sumerian traditions, Norse legends, and Native American narratives converge surprisingly in their descriptions of ancient giants. This validation would force a fundamental reevaluation of how we interpret ancient scriptures and oral traditions. Scientifically, the official discovery of a previously unknown giant hominid lineage would completely revolutionize our understanding of evolution, anthropology, and terrestrial biodiversity. Established models of evolutionary development would need to be revised to accommodate the existence of parallel species that evolved such dramatically different physical characteristics. Sociologically, the revelation that intelligent and powerful creatures have secretly inhabited our planet would fundamentally challenge our assumptions about human supremacy and territorial control. If beings older and possibly more powerful than humans exist, what is our true position in the planetary hierarchy? Politically, governments would be forced to reveal decades or centuries of suppressed knowledge about these creatures. The extent of this systematic concealment would raise profound questions about government transparency, information rights, and the ethical limits of national security classification. Philosophically, the confirmed existence of beings that transcend our current understanding of reality would force a fundamental reassessment of the nature of consciousness, intelligence, and our place in the cosmos. Would we be psychologically prepared as a species to accept that we are not the only evolved intelligent beings on this planet? This testimony represents much more than an isolated sighting of a mysterious creature. It represents an invitation to question the limits of our accepted understanding of reality and consider the possibility that our world is significantly more complex and populated than our official institutions acknowledge. If creatures like the one described by the soldier truly exist, They represent a living bridge between our modern world and ancient eras when the distinction between myth and reality was much less defined. They force us to confront the possibility that many legends preserved by traditional cultures may contain kernels of historical truth that have been systematically discarded by modern intellectual arrogance. The persistence of similar accounts in geographically separate and historically disconnected cultures suggests that perhaps we are dealing not with collective fantasies, but with cultural memories of real encounters with beings that existed and possibly still exist in the most remote and inaccessible regions of our planet. The Salvadoran soldier carried the weight of his testimony for decades, knowing that few would believe his experience, but unable to deny the reality of what he had witnessed. His narrative consistency and reluctance to embellish or dramatize details suggest the authenticity of someone who simply reported what he saw, regardless of the implications or the receptiveness of his audience. In a world where truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, perhaps it's time we seriously consider the possibility that we are not alone on this planet and perhaps never were. Perhaps it's time we recognize that the limits of our current scientific understanding do not define the limits of possible reality. The testimony of a soldier on a remote mountain in El Salvador may be more than an extraordinary story. It may be a window into ancient truths that our modern civilization is not yet ready to accept, but which may be essential to a fuller understanding of our world and our place in it. If this account has caught your attention, if it has raised questions about the limits of our known reality, or if it has simply made you reflect on the hidden possibilities that may exist in the most remote regions of our planet, then it has fulfilled its fundamental purpose. Submit your suggestion and help amplify voices like that of the Salvadoran veteran who had the courage to share experiences that challenge our conventional understanding of the world. Each share is a vote for transparency and serious investigation of extraordinary phenomena. Have you had a similar experience? Do you know of similar accounts from other regions? Do you believe we should investigate these narratives more seriously? Or are you still skeptical? Your perspective enriches the conversation and can provide additional pieces to this complex puzzle. Subscribe to the channel to receive notifications about future investigations. We have other extraordinary accounts from military veterans, explorers, and ordinary people who witnessed events that defy conventional explanations. Like this content if you believe stories like this deserve to be preserved and seriously investigated, regardless of how extraordinary they may seem. Your support is crucial to continue bringing to light stories that would otherwise remain buried in institutional silence. The truth, however strange, deserves to be heard. And perhaps, collectively, we can begin to piece together a more complete picture of the extraordinary reality that may exist beyond the limits of our current understanding. Thank you for being with me on this journey into the unknown.